So hello again and back to the title slide. Today's webinar is called Talis Aspire Moving to GA4. My name is David Renfree. I'm the Senior Customer Success Consultant here at Technology for Sage. And I also have a couple of colleagues online this afternoon who will be co-presenting with me. So we have Tim Hodson, who is our Head of Customer Success. And we also have a guest speaker today, that is James Fisher, who is the Digital Enhancement Co-ordinator at Leeds Beckett University. And so he's going to be talking in a few minutes' time about what Leeds Beckett have been doing with regards to GA4 and Talis Aspire. Before we get to that, though, let's just have a look at the agenda and see exactly what we will be covering this afternoon. So this is our outline for the next hour or so. We will be saying, well, what is GA4? Why are we actually holding this webinar today? We will be talking about how you get access to GA4. And if you've attended any of our product update webinars over the last couple of months, you'll know that we've discussed some of these issues already, but this will sort of give you the latest. We're then going to turn it over to James, who is going to talk about what Leeds Beckett have been doing with GA4 with relation to Talis Aspire. So because Leeds Beckett have been using GA4 quite extensively with various systems over the last 12 months or so, they've had early access to their GA4 property with regards to Talis Aspire. And yeah, it's sort of a chance for James to feedback on what he's managed to find out. We do intend to leave plenty of time for discussion and Q&A because we're well aware that there will be many questions about this as we go through today. Obviously, we don't know exactly what you're going to ask, but I would just say if you drop your questions into the chat as we go, then between us, I would hope we can answer whatever it is you need to know. And then, yeah, we will wrap up with the next steps, so now that you're all a bit more clued up about GA4 and what you need to do, what are next steps, both for yourselves and what you can expect from us at TFS. So the first item on that agenda, what is GA4? Well, as I said, we've covered this in a couple of recent product updates. But essentially, as I'm sure you all know, every Talis Aspire tenancy, when it's set up, has had a Google Analytics property attached to it. And we have worked with you during your implementations to sort of say, okay, who needs access to this? Give us their addresses. We arrange for you to have access to it. There are a couple of dashboards in those properties that have been set up for you, and what you do with them is really your own business. But essentially, it's a way for you to get analytics on, how many visits you are getting to your Talis Aspire setup, what are the most popular lists, what are the most popular routes into your lists, where are your users coming from, what devices are they using, that kind of thing. The properties that you currently have in place are what are called Universal Analytics setup. So this is, Google's traditional Google Analytics setup. It's called Universal Analytics. Universal Analytics is being retired at the end of this month. So, this isn't a change that we at Technology from Sage are imposing on you. This is a change that's coming from Google. They are retiring that product. They are now encouraging everybody to move over to GA4, which is the next iteration of Google Analytics. If you've logged into your Google Analytics property recently, you've probably seen a clock with a countdown timer telling you that the change is coming soon and you need to take some action. We have already set up Google GA4 properties for all of the Talis Aspire tenancies some months ago, and they've been sitting there gathering data for a few months now. And our thinking there was that, as and when you needed to switch, we would already have some data for you in the new setup. And so there wouldn't be a gap, where you didn't have any data on what your users had been up to. So, yeah, that's essentially what it is. And today's webinar is just to give you a bit more of an idea about how they work and, what you may need to do with regards to them. Some of you may be thinking, of course, that we also have our own data gathering product, which is called Advanced MIS. Some of you will already have access to that. So there is a slide here which actually talks about the difference between Google Analytics and our own Advanced MIS product. And Tim, I think you wanted to say a few words at this stage.
Yes, thank you. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I am in a large room with a lot of other people at the moment. In terms of Google Analytics versus Advanced MIS, Google Analytics is designed obviously by Google. It's designed as a tool to help marketers track performance of websites and to get how much or to track how much money they're converting from the landing pages and other kind of marketing tools that they're using the website for. The reason I'm raising that is because that means that some of the data that is collected is best understood through that marketing lens in terms of average time on site and bounce rates and things like that. They're all designed to help you understand how your website is performing. And a lot of those things don't really apply to reading lists, because reading lists are about directing students to resources and actually getting the resources into the hands of the students so that they can actually just get on and read those. So actually spending a lot of time on the list is potentially a bad thing, because it means they perhaps aren't finding what they were looking for or finding something useful, or they're just struggling with the, I don't know, the length of the list, for example. The other point here is around data collection. Google Analytics is collected in the browser, so it's very much at the whim of local machines and browsers that allow Google Analytics data to be collected. And even some networks might be tracking Google Analytics data by blocking particular traffic on the network. So there will be gaps in some of that data. It's still useful. It can still give you an indication of levels of usage of reading lists. But there's a few things that Google Analytics can never know. For example, in Advanced MIS, we actually know if the user's logged in, we actually know who they are, and we know what type of user they are. So we know if they're a student, we know if they're an academic, we know if they're a library user. And so actually that adds a lot more color to the data that we're collecting in Advanced MIS about events that the users are taking within the system. Also, because we're collecting this at the server side, so in our application, it doesn't matter whether your browser is blocking link tracking or blocking Google Analytics or anything else, we can still count that somebody's used that thing, because to be able to use the list and to view the list, that's going to be allowed. And so we've got I think we've got a kind of a higher rate of data collection there. The other thing that we can tell that Google Analytics can't, because it doesn't know, is that your users are coming from the LTI tools integrations with your learning systems. So we know if they're coming to a list, we know if they're coming to a section, and we can see that reflected in the event data that's captured in Advanced MIS. The other thing that I've got on here as an advantage of Advanced MIS is around the link types and being able to count clicks on specific links. We can actually see which types of links are being used the most, and even whether an item is being expanded in collapse. Again, you can see some of that information in Google Analytics, but if you want to look at kind of the student view of student use of the online resource button versus the academic use of that same button, or if you wanted to filter out academic use and library use of the list, you can't do that in Google Analytics. So yeah, it's that level of detail that we've got because we've got that specialist reading list knowledge. And I think that was the thing that I just wanted to highlight here. I'm not saying Google Analytics and you shouldn't use it. Absolutely, it's a great tool. But there are advantages to Advanced MIS as well, and the event capture data that is available through there. So David, back to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tim. I'm glad you were explaining that. So I've just got one more final slide before we ask James to introduce himself and tell us a bit about what he's been doing with GA4. So again, we've mentioned this in previous product update webinars, but what we are doing as part of the switch to GA4, we are taking this as a chance to review who actually needs access to Google Analytics from each institution. So as it says on that slide, we're almost there. Last time we did a shout out and asked universities to complete this form, we were up to 61 institutions, I think it was, who had completed it. We're now up to 75, so it has improved. We are getting there. But if your institution hasn't already completed this form, can we just ask that one person, there's a link there on the slide and I can drop it into the chat later as well. Can I just make sure that at least one person from each institution has filled out that form? And essentially what it is, it's a short form saying, you know, we need to know who needs access to GA4. So tell us who you are, which institution you are from, and give us the email addresses of people that will need access to your GA4 setup. That's really all it is. And as I say, I will drop it into the chat in a few moments' time so that if you haven't already completed it, you can do so. Okay, so at this point, I am delighted to introduce James Fisher from Leeds Beckett University. I will let him introduce himself in terms of, you know, his role at Leeds Beckett and what have you. But essentially what we've asked him to do is just give you a little demonstration of what Leeds Beckett have already done with GA4 with Talis Aspire, and just to talk about their experiences of using it. So James, are you there?
I am here. Yes, thank you.
And are you able to share your screen?
Yes, I will do that now. And then
If I stop sharing.
Yeah, if you could, please. I should hopefully be sharing now a Google Analytics property, which isn't the one I'll be talking about, but it's just to show you the countdown clock and how worried we all should be that in 23 days the old analytics is being turned off. So just as by way of introduction, my name's James Fisher and I'm the Digital Enhancement Co-ordinator at Leeds Beckett University. I work in the library and my main job is to ensure that library IT services are as interconnected as possible and as up to date as possible and delivering the best content we can for our students. And Google Analytics does form a large part of what I do in my role because we try where possible to be as data led in our decision making as possible, and analytics plays a large part in that. So for the Talis side of things, my background isn't really in anything to do with Talis as such. I'm coming at it from the analytics point of view. So when David asked me to speak today, this is my experience of sort of the background of Google Analytics and the mechanisms of getting your property up and running and the types of reports you can have, rather than specifically giving you advice about what to find in a Talis analytics report, for example. It's more about how we've set things up and the usefulness of certain reports that are already delivered with Google Analytics 4 versus the ones that you can set up as custom reports. So I will just begin the demonstration by showing you, yes, we've got the countdown clock, but this is our Google Analytics property page. And just by way of showing you how many properties we are running, I'll just take you down the list to show you. Now, the first thing to mention is, as we reach our reading lists, as we call our Talis properties, you'll notice we have the Universal Analytics and the Google Analytics 4 ones running at the same time, which is how Google have advised everybody to set their properties up. Because we set our property up approximately 3 or 4 months ago for Talis, it was always a wise thing to do to keep the Universal Analytics property running at the same time. You only get data from your Google Analytics property once you've set that property up. It can't retrospectively pull the data through. So it's always advisable to keep your Universal Analytics property running until it ends at the end of this month, and then you have that data to call on at any point. So I would always advise as well, when you're setting your properties up, when you have your current property set up, I would personally just add UA to the end of that property. So at a glance, you know that's the Universal Analytics property. And likewise, when you set your GA4 one up, if you add GA4 to the end, it just means as you're scrolling down a list, it's very easy to spot which is your Universal Analytics property and which one's your GA4. It's a real time saver, that. So if we actually go into our property, it should load fairly quickly. You may see it looks slightly different. So what I'm going to do is I will just assume that that you haven't used GA4 before. So if you have, apologies if this is explaining things you already know, but I think it's quite useful just to talk you through the dashboard of how GA4 looks compared to Universal Analytics. You'll probably see there's far less on the left-hand side than you're maybe used to in Universal Analytics. And of those menu items, we can completely discount the advertising one because obviously Talis has no connection with Google advertising, and we just don't need to use that menu item at all. So basically we're down to our reports and our explore menu options. But before I go into those, I will just show you how the properties are set up within GA4. So if you go to your admin button at the bottom there, you need to go to data streams here to see the property that's currently set up. And if you click on that, that then opens all of the details up about it. So as you'll see, we have our stream name, which we have named there. The stream URL is our Talis URL. So that's obviously where you would be putting your institution Talis URL. Your stream ID and your measurement ID are the unique properties for that particular Google Analytics 4 instance. So for Talis, that measurement ID is unique, that stream ID is unique. What will be asked usually, and I'm talking in general terms as well as for Talis, is if you are setting up a property with a company who already have the infrastructure and they just need the Google Analytics property ID, most times you will just send them over the measurement ID, so you can copy that, send that to them, and they will then insert that measurement ID, and that will link your GA4 property to the particular service that you're tracking. If you, for example, are using a content management system or tracking your own websites, it's more than likely that you will insert some code in the head part of the website, and that will track it. But because we won't be going into that, I won't go into that in any more detail, but that's just the two ways really of getting your Google 4 Analytics property up and running. The other thing to mention on this page is enhanced measurements. So as a little bit of background, Google Analytics 4 uses events as its measuring tool. So you may be familiar with what events are from Universal Analytics. So events is basically anything which occurs within Google Analytics which is tracked and measured. So for example, a page click, engagement time, clicking between various external and internal pages, those are measured as events. But what GA4 has done is it's allowed far more events to be embedded within GA4 already, rather than you having to set them up as individual events as a separate entity. So by that, what I mean is in Universal Analytics, if you had something fairly specific that you wanted to track, the chances are that you might have needed to use a tool called Tag Manager, which sets up a specific event. So if you wanted to know, for example, if tabs on a tabbed box had been clicked and the content in that had been read, the chances are you would have to set up a separate tag to do that. Likewise, if you were looking at scroll depth of a page to see how far down a page somebody had read, you would have to set that up as a separate tag. GA4 covers a lot more, and it does not require you to set up quite as many specific custom events they're all bound up already, delivered out of the box. But the thing you need to make sure you do to get the best out of it is to click this enhanced measurement tool here, because what that does is it gives you straight out of the box all of these events instantly measured by GA4 without any further work from you. So as I mentioned with the scroll depth, that is quite useful on a Talis page, because if you're wanting to see how far down somebody is engaging with a reading list, whether they're going to say, for example, 10% of that list, 25%, or all the way to the bottom into the 80s and 90%, that GA4 can now track that for you. So scroll depth is quite a good one to have. So you don't need to do any more than just simply tick that button there, and that will start gathering that data for you. As I mentioned earlier about retrospective data collection, until that box is ticked, it will not collect those specific events for you. So what I would advise is, as you set up your property, just scroll down, tick that on and save it immediately. And then you know that from the start of your property gathering data, it will be gathering all of those events for you. So that's a little bit of introduction about the property settings themselves. So if we go back to the report side of things, when I first started using GA4, which was approximately 18 months ago now, it did look very different to how it looks now. And the reason for that is I do believe that Google are responding to feedback. And as more people are becoming more familiar with GA4, and more people are having to switch to it, because obviously the deadline is looming for when Universal Analytics is being switched off, the more feedback they're responding to, that they are changing it, because a lot of these menu items were quite cluttered before and jumbled up, and they've streamlined those now into these reports, explore and advertising menus. So what I'm telling you now, this is just a bit of a warning, may not necessarily be how Google Analytics 4 will look in, say, 6 months' time, because my personal opinion is, once Universal Analytics is switched off, I think Google will get a flood of people suddenly saying, this looks too different to Universal Analytics, I can't find my way around where I need to be. And they will slowly respond to that and possibly adjust how things look in this menu. So what I show you today may be subject to change. But how we are at the moment is we have our sort of welcome dashboard, which does quite a lot actually. And this is one of the points I want to make. There may be most of the things that you need for your Talis stats straight out of the box. You may not need to do any custom reporting because it does a good job of giving you a lot of information in quite an easy to digest form. So as you'll see here, we have our sort of summary page showing what we have. Insights and recommendations is quite a new thing within GA4. And basically what that's doing is trying to suggest to you what you may find the most interesting part of your data and giving you those custom reports back without you having to do any work. So what it does is it learns over time. So if you access certain reports quite regularly, GA4 will then start adding insights and recommendations based on that specific set of data to this bottom here. And it just saves you sometimes the job of having to go to the report yourself. It will provide you with predictions for your data in future and summaries of the data that's gone. So that's quite a useful little tool there. But if we go into our reports menu here, we have what may look familiar to you now. So we have acquisition, engagement, monetization. Again, with the monetization, we can pretty much ignore that because that's obviously to do with commercial websites. But our acquisition overview, if we go into our overview here, we'll see a lot of these sort of almost scorecard-like graphs. And if you want at any point to view it in real time, so for example, if we wanted to look at our sessions, we can view that in real time. And if we do want to download any of the reports, we can go to the share here. Now, this is where I will just mention one of the big disadvantages, in my opinion, of GA4, and that is you cannot schedule emails. So you can't schedule email reports where every month you would send a particular report out to a certain cohort of colleagues. The email facility has been withdrawn from Google Analytics 4. So if you're used to having regular reports that you send out to colleagues via email through analytics, unfortunately you can't do that anymore. There is a way around that, which I'll explain later, but it's slightly more complicated. But for the moment, if you wanted to share any of this data, you've got the option of downloading the file or sharing it as a link. So sharing it as a link would mean that that person would have to have a Google Analytics account to be able to log in to view that information. But downloading the file, you can do it either as a CSV or as a PDF. Just as a word of warning, if you do go to the download PDF file, which I will do now to demonstrate, it's not, in a lot of cases, let me just save that. It's not in a lot of cases the full screen. It will cut off on some of them. So if you've got a long list of graphs or scorecards or data, you may find that the PDF doesn't pick up everything that's on there. It can be quite annoying if you are wanting the full thing. So just as a warning, on pages like this, it's absolutely fine. But if you do have quite a few things on one page, I have noticed it does cut off. So possibly it might be worth downloading the CSV as long as you're not wanting like a dashboard looking style of report. Engagement, I will just talk about in a little bit more detail because this has the events on it. So as I mentioned earlier, GA4 is measuring most things by events. As you'll see with event names, this is where it becomes a little bit clearer what they are. So for example, a page view, a scroll, a session start, a first visit, etc. You can dig into the data here, and if you wanted to change the date range, obviously that's in the top right hand corner like it was in Universal Analytics. Another thing I find quite odd about the date range is there isn't a past month one. You've got last 28 days, last 30 days, last 90 days, but not the last calendar month, which I do find really odd. Whether I'm just missing that and it is somewhere obvious and I haven't found it, I don't know, but I've been using GA4 a while now and I haven't found that. So another little disadvantage to it there. So the events, I think personally, will be fine without you adding any custom events. I don't believe in my time using this with Talis stats, I've needed any custom events. I won't explain custom events in any more detail because it can be quite complicated. But if you did want to go down that route, I'm more than happy to explain them to you. If you wanted to contact me, that's absolutely fine. Pages and screens is another area I will show you because this really is the reason why Google have changed to Google Analytics 4, because what they found with Universal Analytics was it wasn't able to capture apps in any particularly accurate way. So app usage, mobile devices, any sort of site that wasn't a traditional website, it was struggling with. So GA4 has been built it's basically been built from the ground upwards. It's not an iteration of Universal Analytics. It's a brand new product, and because of that, they have heavily invested in making sure it's accurate with apps as well. So you will find a lot of reference to screens and screen classes within GA4, which you didn't so much in Universal Analytics, and a lot of that is because it's asking you to think of engagement via a screen rather than say a click, because it's wanting to measure app usage as much as web usage. In our instance, if we go back to our data stream, you will see that there is a an Android, an iOS, and a web area there. So if we did have an app, we could add it there, but obviously we're just working from the web. So that's why ours is just coming up as a default as a web. But that's one of the main reasons why GA4 has been created, to start tracking apps. So they're the, well, I know it's been a very quick tour of those reports there. But this is, I'll spend a few minutes in here, which is the explorations menu. Now, explorations is where if you're wanting to create more custom reports that are specifically measuring things that you want to measure, rather than just what Google Analytics is suggesting that you're looking at, this is the place to do it. And this is where I have set up my own exploration for our Talis analytics that we find useful. So basically what this is it's not much more than a drag and drop report, very similar to a pivot table, where you can add dimensions into this second column, and that will then produce a table of data on the right hand side. What you can do is add tabs to it. So if I take it from the left hand tab to the right, these are what we're measuring at the moment for our Talis lists. So we have a technology tab here. So what you do is in the dimensions, you can add dimensions from here. So a dimension is basically anything that you want to measure. You can either search for it or scroll through. So if you know the dimension you're wanting to measure, you can type it in up there, or you can just scroll down and tick the ones you want, for example, gender or event name, etc. Once it's been added to the dimensions column here, you then drag that across. So for example, if I wanted to know the town or city that our users are in, if I drag that across to the rows there, when it actually takes it, I wonder why that's, oh, I wonder why that's not going in. Just take that one off for a minute. There we are. That's it. It's because there's five rows already on there. But if I wanted to know the town or city, it's simply just a case of dragging or dropping over, and that will then add it to my table on this side here. So I've basically gone through each of our reports that we used and added them as a tab to a single report here. If you wanted to, you could add them as separate explorations. So you could just do a single exploration for each one if that's an easier way of finding this information. And we've done things like our landing page and the query string. That in itself may not be particularly useful, but the page title probably will be. So in our dimensions here, we have our page title there that we just drag across, and that adds it to the report there. We have our total users and our views, our sessions and our views per session. If you do need an explanation of what each of these are, as in views, sessions and views per sessions, the Google help is very, very good. It will break down all of these dimensions and metrics and tell you exactly what you are measuring. And obviously there's a lot of online help about this out there as well, more and more by the month as people are converting to Google Analytics 4. So you should be able to find what you need just doing general web searches. We have our landing page there. We have our exit pages, which is a very similar sort of report here. Landing page and query string there, and page title. If we wanted to change them round and put page title as our first, we can just swap them around there. We do also have a filter. Let's go to one. If I go back to technology, that might be the best demonstration for a filter. So it's a basic filter here, but you can also add other filters, more advanced filters if you want. But for this purposes of the reports like this should be okay. So you can bring up what you want to filter on. So if we filter on, let's go for mobile model, and we want it to exactly match Chrome. So we simply apply that there, and that will just instantly update to just Chrome mobile models there if we wanted that. And again, if you want to take the filter off there, we can just delete it there and it's back to how it was before. Our other ones that we use are our top 10 lists and our top 10 items. We did have a problem with some of these not loading, and I remember, I can't remember what it was said. Maybe David or Tim can get back to me on that one when I stop sharing the screen, because I remember they explained that to me. But for the moment, I'll just leave that. And the top 10 items, again, we have some that say loading, but we get the information here for the others. That's the exploration side of things. But if you didn't want to use the explorations that I've shown you, they do suggest ones from the template gallery, and it is a case of where you just click on it there and then it starts suggesting what to use. There are things called segments as well, and what a segment is, it's a subset of your data. So if, for example, you wanted a subset of your data of technology, so if we went back to technology there, you can do the segment comparison there. So what you would do is you would add a segment, and you would create the segment there, and then you would drop that into your segment comparison, and that would then bring back your technology segments. That is probably all I'll be able to say in the time limit we have about segments, but there is some really, really good information out there about those as well on the Google Analytics help. Talking of help, I just thought I would show you a couple of sites that I found very, very interesting and useful. There's one called Analytics Mania. So there's a YouTube channel for Analytics Mania, and they have loads of introductory tutorials, Google Analytics for beginners being a particularly good one. And what's good about Analytics Mania as well is they do written instructions alongside videos. So if you prefer to learn by reading it rather than watching the video, they break down the instructions into a single video and then the written instructions underneath, so you can follow it step by step. And the other one, which I recommend, is one called Measure School. Very similar to Analytics Mania. They do some really, really good introductory GA4 videos. Ones like this here, what is GA4 and why should I use it? Again, they're highly recommended. So those two resources are really good. So just to finish off, when I mentioned about the workaround for scheduling email reports, I'm not sure whether any of you are familiar with what's called Looker Studio. That did used to be called Data Studio up until about 6 months ago. So you may be familiar with Google Data Studio. It's basically exactly the same thing, just with a few improvements, but they've renamed it Looker Studio. But what you can do there is you can link up your Google Analytics account to the data receiver within Looker Studio and then produce dashboards here. So as a rough example of one that I've done on our library web page, it's a fairly basic one, but the big advantage of using Looker Studio is when you share it, you can share it either via a link here, or it's also possible to now schedule an email delivery. So if you did have Talis reports that you thought were going to be useful for colleagues and you didn't want them to either log into Google Analytics 4 because they would need training, or you wanted to restrict the number of people who could actually get into analytics, this may be a workaround for you where you can link up your data to Looker Studio and then schedule your email reports from there, and you can repeat those as often as you want, from daily to monthly to bi-monthly to annually. So that's just a little tip for you if you didn't want to have people logging into GA4 if they didn't need to. You may be able to create a report that way instead. So that was everything I wanted to cover today, because I am aware of the time, but I am happy to answer any questions, hopefully that I will be able to answer for you. But if not, if you did want to email me, I can make my details available. I can get David, if you wanted to publicise those for you. And I'm happy to answer the questions by email as well, because what we've been through with our Talis sort of analytics connection and the reports that we're doing is slightly different to each other of the other properties we've set up. So if I haven't done it in Talis, there's a chance I may have done it in another property we have set up. So if there are questions, I may be able to answer that for you, even if it's for another Google Analytics 4 property that you're working on. So with that, I will hand back to David, and hopefully if you do have any questions for any of us, we can answer them now.
Yeah, that was brilliant, James. Thank you so much. And I have also been taking notes while you've been talking, because I've learned a couple of things there myself. Sorry, excuse me, I'm just trying to get Zoom to show my my slide deck again, which I think it is now doing. Marvelous, thank you. So yeah, we wanted to leave some time for discussion and, you know, Q&A, because we were sure that there would be plenty as a result of this. Excuse me. There is a question from Andrew at Worcester first. And he says, what are the most used or useful analytics reports by the library at Leeds Beckett?
I'm really sorry about that. I was reading through the comments, so I didn't actually catch that question. I'm sorry.
That's all right. I'll read it again. What are the most used or useful analytics reports by the library at Leeds Beckett?
I would say the most used ones are the ones that are just delivered with GA4 as basically the main dashboard reporting ones. At a glance, we can usually find everything that we need from those. It's only, say, every 6 months or so when we have a specific inquiry about maybe a particular list that's had an amount of activity that we want to measure, or one that hasn't had an amount of activity, that we will then dig into the stats in any more detail. The first screen I showed you of the reports, that is usually sufficient because we tend to only need certain bits of information at certain times, and even the geographical information isn't particularly useful to us most of the time. So it's really about the usage, and the usage you get from the delivered reports. So really, I would say, unless you want to specifically go into very targeted information very quickly, I would make yourself familiar with those reports first of all, and that should, I would have thought, cover most of the things that you need.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. There's a question from Phil, which is aimed at ourselves rather than you. We are interested in what Talis are doing around cookie consent. Are users explicitly asked to consent to the capture of GA data or for advanced MIS? So Phil, Tim has messaged me. Tim, for some reason, seems unable to send messages to everyone at the moment, so I'm acting as his messenger. Not 100% sure of the answer on that one, to be completely honest with you. What I think I would suggest, if you can raise a ticket with us, we can route that to our Chief Technology Officer and get an answer from him. And actually, when we send out the recording, I think it would be useful if we sort of, you know, we got his response and we added that to the recording that comes around as well, so that everybody's got the answer. In fact, actually, I'm asking you to raise a ticket. I can just take the question from the chat and I'll do it myself. So yeah, ignore that. Do keep your questions coming. There was one thing that James mentioned there, which was trying to understand why some lists or items were showing as blank when you were running reports on them. And I think what the answer to that is is that sometimes if you've got a particularly long list or detailed item, Google Analytics will actually take the data and sort of capture it before we've actually finished loading it, because you may know that some of the longer lists out there actually load in stages. So I suspect, James, and I can't prove this here and now, but I suspect if you looked at those ones that were missing, they would be among some of the longer items you've got or longer lists. But
Right.
that's what we think it is.
Yes. Is it all right if I just jump in about there's a mention in the chat about why would we want to know genders?
Yeah.
Gender information from Google is purely taken from people who voluntarily put that in, either as part of their profile, or they can opt out of that. We don't specifically collect it. It's something that Google deliver to us. But a word on that is Google will aggregate any data where it's below a certain threshold. So if there aren't enough people that it knows have specifically declared that information, it will make a best guess about that. And if it doesn't have that information at all, it will report back that it doesn't have the information. So there's no way of tracking specific people from a gender. So say only 5 people use a particular reading list, there's no way we could then track that information down to 3 being female, 2 being male. It can't work like that. Google, yes, we understand Google hoover up as much personal data as they can, but the gender issue isn't one where we've specifically asked to measure that. That's something that Google deliver, but Google only deliver the information that they have been given. And if they haven't got that data, they will make a best guess based on aggregated data. So I just thought I'd clear that up for everybody.
No, that's great. Thank you. And on the issue of privacy as well, I do know, because it came up in a discussion a while ago, that GA4 doesn't track user IP addresses either. That's correct, isn't it? I think so.
Yes, it is. That's correct.
Brilliant. Thank you. Another question. Do the library staff access the analytics via the dashboard they log into, or do you send around regular reports for them?
It's the latter. So we send regular reports for them. We don't have much engagement with any form of dashboard, whether that's in Looker Studio or Analytics. Unfortunately, we just don't seem to get the staff buy into it. We do training sessions, we explain how to access it, and it just doesn't seem to be something that staff do on a regular basis. They would much prefer to receive an email report which prompts them to open it at that point and read it. So we've gone down the route of emailing those reports to them, which is why I was so disappointed that the GA4 instance doesn't have the scheduled email delivery built in. I'm still hopeful that might change in the future if more and more people ask for it, but for the moment we're having to use the workaround of using Looker Studio reports for that.
Yeah, and that while you were talking about that, I did drop into the chat that we actually send around a monthly dashboard to people at the moment, and you know, because that is present in Universal Analytics, obviously we can't do that anymore. So yeah, that's a bit frustrating from our side. There's a question from Kathy. Is there a link or help for Looker Studio?
I don't want to sound patronizing, but you can just Google Looker Studio, and with it being a Google product, it instantly pops up with a lot of information about that. I mean, I can give you the direct URL if you want, but as far as I know, if you I'm just trying it now. If you put in Looker Studio, it should be the first thing that comes up that says Looker Studio Overview, and then there's a sign in button from there. So it is just lookerstudio.google.com. And if you then go into that, it does suggest areas where you can sort of, it gives you tips on how to set things up basically. So with it being quite a, well, not a new service as such, because it used to be Data Studio, but a rebadged service probably is the best way to describe it. They are very keen to get people to use it. So once you're in there, they do suggest a lot of help. So yeah, I would suggest going to lookerstudio.google.com and you should find what you're looking for.
Brilliant, thank you. I was going to have a quick hunt myself, but because I'm sharing my screen, I thought that might not be a good idea.
Yeah.
There's a question from Nick. We use Power BI. I guess there will be something on the web with GA4 about this too.
Yes, there is, and Power BI is actually quite good at linking with Looker Studio as well. Not being a Power BI user myself, I'm not fully aware of what's out there for that, but there's certainly information, and I think the two, so the Measure School and the Analytics Mania channels that I recommended, I think they do have information on that out there as well.
Brilliant, thank you, James. There's a question from Rebecca. Will any existing custom reports need to be recreated in GA4? Tim, I'm 99% sure the answer to that is yes, because they're not going to be carried over, are they?
Yes. So the custom reports that you have now are not, because there's no way for us to kind of carry them over automatically. However, some of the dashboards actually replicate some of the similar reports anyway. So you may find that they give you enough information. And also hopefully what James has shown you around the explore option will kind of allow you to drill into some of the detail in a bit more depth. So yeah, we're hoping that will, we hope that will be a better experience in terms of being able to explore some of the data. But yeah, we do also expect that the usefulness of just having a default dashboard. Spanish, Analytics 4.
Okay, thank you, Tim. So we are getting close to time. I'd just like to wrap this up. James has just dropped his email address into the chat, by the way, if anyone would like to get hold of him after this. I do want to say a big thank you to you today, James. Thank you for that. That was really helpful. I'm sure that a lot of people on this webinar have sort of got some things to take away from this. And I suspect you're going to be getting some questions coming your way over the
That's
next
fine. Yeah,
days.
please do. Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much for your time. That was so helpful. If I can just wrap this up in terms of next steps. So there's a couple of things to do. From our end, we are in the process of preparing our documentation. On our support site, we currently have some support articles which are in draft, so they're not publicly available yet, but we have been working on them and sort of thinking about, okay, what a user is going to want to know, what can we usefully tell them. So the documentation will be available soon. And obviously we know there's a ticking deadline on this, which is out of our control. So the documentation is coming. Those of you who have filled out the form requesting access to GA4, again, we'll be getting on to that over the next couple of weeks or so, and actually making sure that you all have access to your GA4 properties and can start having a play. We did discuss amongst ourselves about the possibility of maybe a few months down the line from here, if we find that some universities have done something particularly innovative or creative with their GA4 setups, then perhaps we can arrange a future webinar in a few months' time, just showcasing good examples of how people have used it to find new insights into how people are using Talis Aspire. The other thing with regard to next steps, as I said at the start, we're recording this webinar, so the recording will be sent around in the next couple of days. I have made a note to myself to investigate Phil's question around cookie consent and whether users are explicitly asked to consent for the capture of GA data. And yeah, I will send out the answer when we send out a link to the recording in the next couple of days or so. I'm just going to do one last check of the questions. Many thanks, that cleared up a lot of questions. That's from Ian. Nick says, when can we get access to GA4? You've just answered my question, so yeah, very soon, Nick. Yeah, and people generally seem very positive. So if there are no further questions, I am going to do a very quick bit of marketing. This obviously has been like a community webinar because we've had input from a member of our user community. So yeah, just a very quick plug. We are doing another community webinar next month on July the 12th, and that will be with Hazel Rotherer from Oxford Brookes, talking about how they have improved academic engagement with Aspire reading lists at Oxford Brookes. So I think it just remains for me to thank James once again. Thanks, Tim, for dialing in from your away day.
No, that's no problem. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And yeah, thank you to everyone this afternoon. Hopefully you found it useful, and I'm sure we'll be speaking again soon. So thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.